Welcome to Project A, Tech Insights.
All right, so yeah, just a quick intro again from myself. I'm Adrian. I work here at Evernest, based in Hamburg, a prop tech company. So just a quick summary on what we're going to cover in this presentation. So we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly a Contentful app framework is to start with. I think there might be a lot of people here who are already familiar with it, but for those who are not, I'll just quickly go through that and some advantages as to why maybe you would want to use that. Following on from there, I'm going to jump into a quick tour of our Next.js application just to show you the kind of setup we have there. It's very simple, which is kind of the point of why we like to advocate for using this for Contentful applications. We use it ourselves, pretty much the exact same setup. More about that in a second. Then we're actually going to do a bit of I hesitate to say live coding, live copy pasting to show you a sort of reproduction of an app that we actually use ourselves in Contentful that makes our editors' lives a lot more easy. And then I think towards the end, hopefully we'll still have some time left over for questions. I think if you want to ask questions during, I think it's up to maybe if Gregor and David want to jump in and answer them on the fly, if there's going to be quick answers or any kind of more long-winded ones we can leave towards the end of the presentation, perhaps. Excellent. So the summary over, let's just jump into a quick kind of intro about Contentful apps and the framework. So what are Contentful apps? Basically, they're an easy way for you to extend or enhance the Contentful UI. So something that we found as our features kind of evolved, as things got more complex, as our entries kind of developed more and more different fields, and with no kind of basic way in Contentful for you to kind of conditionally show, hide fields, kind of maybe do some more fancy stuff there. Contentful apps are really an excellent way to kind of add that functionality into your application, into the Contentful UI, which really kind of improves the quality of life of your editors. And for myself and Gregor as developers, it kind of keeps them off our back a little bit because they can handle things inside of Contentful. I'll show you a really cool application just in a second about that. So yeah, actually I can jump into that right now. So one of the applications we built recently, I just have a screenshot of it for you here, was an application that our editors can use to basically configure the header and footer navigation of our website. That's somebody cool. Taken care of, whatever that was. Okay, you're forgiven, whoever it was, don't worry. So yeah, this was an application we built for our Contentful space where our editors can basically manage the navigation of our footer and header. So they can configure, basically this includes nesting. So you can see here, we've unternehmen, uber uns, and presse, FAQ, Datenschutz, they're all under the unternehmen section. So on the front end, then we kind of handle rendering this component. Something else I want to mention here is that this is using Forma 36 components. If you're not familiar with those, this is part of Contentful's design system, which basically gives you there's a load of them, a whole set of components that you can use to make sure that your applications kind of slot right into the Contentful ecosystem there. So this kind of was using the entry list component here, I think, and then there's an autocomplete component we're taking advantage of that we can use to sort of look up different entry types we have in our Contentful space, and they can then be used in order to link to those pages in the navigation. So that's just a really cool example of what you can do and the lengths you can go to with Contentful apps. One other quick thing I want to mention here is the Contentful marketplace. So this exists at contentful.com/marketplace, and it is a place that has a number of applications already up there that you can use. You can also have your own private applications, so that you don't want anyone else to use them, but you do have the opportunity to publish them so that other people can take advantage of those. So I encourage you to check that out. Maybe there's something already there that you can use and take advantage of straight away. A couple of quick links here, just a link to the app framework documentation in case you want to look into that more, as well as a link to more about the Forma 36 design system. Now that that is out of the way, I just want to give a quick tour of our Next.js application. Just going to switch over to WebStorm. Excellent. Everything should still be there. Yes, it is. Okay, so I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Next.js or not, but basically it's a framework you can use to create an application based in Next.js and React. It's very simple. So our application here is almost a vanilla implementation of Next.js using the create next app functionality that they have, which is really good to set up an application. You can choose to have TypeScript or not, linting, all these kind of things. Really cool. I definitely recommend to check it out if you're not familiar. So just looking through the different components in our different folders in our source folder here. The first one obviously is components. I think something a lot of us are already familiar with, different components we can reuse across the application. Nothing new there. Again, constants, React hooks we're going to be using throughout the application. And pages is kind of the section I want to highlight here, which is what makes Next.js really advantageous for us to push out Contentful applications, because basically every page in here is its own component and can be its own application in Contentful. So that just makes it really easy to deploy whole sets of applications up at once, whether you have a staging build maybe for your applications that you use in a different Contentful environment. And then you can also deploy a production build of these things, for example, maybe to Netlify, maybe to Vercel, which is Next.js's own kind of implementation, something sort of like Netlify. I won't say exactly like that. But when you use create next app, you'll basically almost get a one-click deployment, which you can use straight to Vercel. So in minutes, you can have something that you could use as a Next.js application, for example. So that's just something I wanted to highlight there. A couple of things we did add here was a higher order component, which we basically use to pass down the Contentful App Framework SDK into our different components. And that's something I just wanted to highlight that we added. To give you a quick example of an application here, we have a switch. So I think there's something a lot of you will be familiar with when it comes to Contentful, which is the default Boolean field. It just gives you a yes, no. It's unselected by default, which I think can be a little confusing for some people, maybe, especially as content entries develop further and further and get more complex. So actually, we found that using one of Contentful's former 36 switch components, we can very easily kind of enhance that with a tiny application. So here's an example. This is the default Boolean field, and this is an application which is set up to basically be the same as the Boolean field, but we're using the former 36 component to get exactly the same functionality and perhaps a little better user experience for that as well. Just to jump in back to the code to show you a little bit about this. Like I said, there's not a lot going on here. It's a very, very simple application. We have some state to store the Boolean value of the field. We're getting that initially from the SDK if it's already been set. And down here, then we have our switch component, which is coming in directly from Forma 36 up here. So there was very little we actually had to do to get this running here. Something I do want to highlight is a couple of features of the SDK that we have here in this use effect. The first one is the auto resizer functionality, which will ensure that basically the components are rendered as iframes. So inside of here, as soon as your iframe grows with further content, this auto resizer will kind of take care of making sure that there's enough space there for your component to be visible. Another thing, which is it's optional depending on your use case for how you work with components, but something we like to put in is if somehow an editor had been working on exactly the same entry as you and they made a change, you can actually add a listener to a particular field to ensure that that value gets updated. I can just give you a quick example of that actually. So here I'm working in this with switch entry, and I've set this to yes. Maybe I'm filling in some other fields here. And if I quickly just jump over to another instance of Contentful I've opened on another screen, we should see that this will magically, it's taking its time today. Let's blame the internet. There we go. I thought it wasn't going to come in there for a second, but there we go. That just updated based on that functionality there. So that's something you can choose to use or not. It's really up to you, but I just wanted to highlight it. Excellent. So that's just an example of a little switch app and something you can do very simply to take advantage of Forma 36 and improve the quality of life, shall we say, of the Contentful experience. I think now I can actually jump into starting to make a new app, or at least the app I mentioned earlier. So something we would come across for, especially when using images in different parts of our application, is that there would be a Contentful image that might be used on different aspect ratios on the website. So sometimes it might be a square on mobile, perhaps it might be 4:3 for tablet, and maybe where it's kind of 69 aspect ratio on desktop. And this is an old problem I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is the cropping of photos. And you get a Slack message saying this person's face has been cut off, or the clock of this tower is being cut off, and on mobile, can we fix it? And it's a bit of a chore to kind of take care of that kind of thing. So an app that we put together for our editors was one that they can preview an image and the different aspect ratios that it will be displayed in on our website. And they can already set that up, taking advantage of Contentful's image API. Again, if nobody is familiar with that. So basically, when you query an image on Contentful, you can add a number of parameters to it to sort of change how that image is returned to you. A couple of the ones we're going to be taking advantage of here are the resizing and cropping ones, which are changing the resizing behavior, as well as the focus area of an image. Now, you can always apply these params to your URL yourself via the front end, but this is something we want to be configured for our editors to be able to configure this in Contentful, and then we can grab it through the GraphQL API and directly use it on the front end. So we'll get back to that in a second, just if you weren't aware. Really cool, really useful. Okay. So jumping back over here, we're just going to first set up the basic skeleton of this sort of aspect ratio preview component. And it's first off kind of almost going to be a copy paste of the Switch app, just with some stuff removed. So I'm just, again, it's live copy paste coding, not live coding. So I just want to talk about things as we go through, because I know I'm kind of acutely aware we don't have a crazy amount of time for this kind of stuff. But so yeah, here's the basic component I want to set up so that we can install it on Contentful. So I've already seen the auto resizer here, and we're taking advantage again of a Forma 36 component node here, just so that we can make sure that our component is rendering on the Contentful UI. So now that that is set up, I have the application here running on localhost. And this is one thing that's really cool about developing these applications, is that you can actually run them inside Contentful on localhost while you develop them and before you deploy them. So that's really cool. And you get a little bit of hot reloading on there as well. So let's just jump into how we install applications in Contentful. Oh, one more thing I forgot to touch while we were talking about the Switch app is how you, I guess we can cover it in this. So firstly, to install an app, you can go into Apps, Manage App inside your space. You'll see these are the available apps on the marketplace already. You can use these directly. And then we already have our Switch app that we installed here. So going into Manage Private Apps, I'm going to create a new app. Going to call it Image. And because I mentioned we're developing this locally, we can basically run it straight off localhost. I think we call it Image, exactly. A couple of other things to mention here about the app framework is that it's not just individual fields you can replace. You can give your app a whole configuration screen when somebody installs it. You can create a sidebar application. You can replace the entire entry editor for an entry or content type. You can also replace the entire page, I believe. I've never gone that far with it. I think you still get basically the navigation up there, but that's really cool. Also, if you need to, I think I need to create this first. So we're going to create this as a JSON object entry field. You can define which kind of entry field this should be. Wonderful. So just one thing I want to highlight again, we're not going to use it for this particular application, but you can subscribe to events in an application and then take advantage of maybe doing other things when somebody does something in your app. You can fire it off there to a webhook or something. Definitely play with that if you have some ideas for it. Okay, now that our app is added, I won't say install just yet because we still need to do that one thing, but the app should now be available back. Oh, I need to jump back into the space, back into Manage Apps. We'll see that our image app is now available to use. So one final thing we need before we can select this inside a content model is to install it. Authorize access, sure, go for it. And now it will appear inside our installed applications here. Excellent. So the next thing I just want to take care of is creating the content model for our image application. And in here, we'll also be able to see how we can enable a Contentful application. Right, let's call this image as well. let's give it a quick contentful title, just something the editors can see in the UI. Create and configure. This represents the entry title. This is something that appears in the UI for editors to know what it is, or maybe to find it more easily. The next field we're going to add is, of course, an image. We're going to need to reference an image here. So we're going to bring that in, create and configure this field. We only want to make sure we're getting images here. So we'll accept only the specified file type of image, and everything else is okay for us there. The next part is the actual application that we're going to build in. Remember, we set it up as a JSON object. So once we select JSON object here, this will be available for us to choose in the appearance tab. I'm just going to call this config, create and configure. And in appearance, we'll see that we now have our image application here ready to select, which is definitely something that we want to do here. So quick save. Two more fields I'm going to add here are fit and focus. We're going to make them hidden fields, and we're going to fill in the data based on what people select in our config later on. So fit, the first one, create a configure, everything good there. And the second one, focus. Wonderful. So just make sure that these won't appear in the interface for editors. I'm going to set those to disabled. Wonderful. Now, if we jump into content and we want to create a new image content type, we should already get our application showing up here. Wonderful. So if I jump back into the code, you'll see that this was the note component. Please select an image. And that is now appearing here. Wonderful. So everything is working out so far. Let's just give it Contentful App Framework. I should have picked a shorter title, right? Image. Oh, let's leave it that before it gets too long. All right. So we can add an image here. I already have one prepared of a Landungsbrücken area in Hamburg. Excellent. So let's jump over to sort of step 2 of developing our application. Let me just bring over some new things. So I'm just going to add some stuff here, commented out, and we'll talk through it as we go. So the first thing we're going to need here is obviously this source of the image we just added in Contentful. So we're going to store that in just a basic React state here. How we get the value of that entry is basically through the SDK. So once the SDK is ready for us here, we're going to query the fields of this content type. Image is the one we created, if you remember, and getting the value of that won't straight away get us the URL of the image, but it will get us the sys ID of the image, which we can then further use the SDK to get the URL, which is this lovely bit here. So if we manage to get an entry link, we're going to query on the space of the SDK, we're going to get the asset, and we're going to use the entry link sys ID that we just got before. And as soon as we get that back, we're basically going to set the image source in our local state so that we can use it further on in our application. The next bit here, we already saw it in the Switch app. It's basically just the same thing. We want to make sure that if an editor changes, specifically in this case, that image, while you're also in the same entry, it will update for you. Wonderful. It's pretty much the same thing here. We're just, as soon as it changes, we're going to get that image and set it in local state. So nothing crazy going on there. Just one other thing I added down here is a quick switch in the JSX, just to say that once an image has been selected, that we now get a different note which says our image has been selected. So everything going to plan. Jumping back over here. Yes, it's already updated to say image selected. Wonderful. So on to the next step of this, which is kind of taking advantage of our former 36 components and to sort of further build out the UI of how people are going to be able to select the fit and focus aspects for this image. So here's some stuff I prepared earlier, as they say. Let's just jump back to the top. So you remember we added our fit and focus fields in Contentful in the content model. So here we're just going to, again, create some simple state for the values for that. We're going to initially get those values from the SDK if they exist. Else we're just going to initialize them as an empty string. Excellent. We also, let's just jump in and next add exactly the same functionality for our on value change things that we saw before. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about that again. Excellent. So if we now jump down into our JSX, you see I've got a lot more stuff in here, but in essence, it's basically just two select fields filled with the values that you can find over in the image API here. If we jump back. Yeah, so we've got here center, top, right, left, bottom. So these are all focus areas that you can choose to focus on the image, or maybe you want to crop the image. Even you can even add some padding around the image if you wish. So jumping back over here, we see we're bringing in a field group, we're bringing in a grid, select field, options. These are all coming in from Forma 36. So there's very little work you need to do yourself, unless you want to. Maybe you have your own design system that you want to implement here instead, and you're welcome to do that. Excellent. So with our two select fields in there, we just want to make sure we're handling the on change of those. So we'll jump back up here a little bit. Just talk about the first one first. They're basically exactly the same thing going on here. We could refactor these out, of course, to be more dynamic, but I think it's fine for our use case here. So as soon as that changes, we just get the value of what the user selected. We make sure to save the value back to Contentful. This is obviously a very important piece we don't want to forget. So you can do that by, again, on the SDK, you can set the particular value back there. And of course, we want to store it in local state. Again, we do the exact same thing for our fit down below. Again, if there's any questions, I don't have the chat open myself, so feel free to kind of jump in and talk as we're going along. Or David, maybe if you see anything I'm doing wrong, let me know so that we can take care of it.
No, so far it looks good.
Okay, whew. Good to know. This was the proof whether or not this was a good way to go. But as long as you guys are happy, then all good. Excellent. So let's jump across again and see how our application has developed. Please select an image. Excellent. So now we have the two select fields that we had just put in there, focus and fit. All the values that we put in here, we don't have. Our next step will be to put in our previews, but excellent. Everything seems to be working out perfect so far.
I think one really interesting thing to note here is also that we have two hidden fields on this content type. So fit and focus are actual fields. That's why we're saving it. So in the end, you are actually able to query for these values instead of just using the JSON object, which then you would have to type again if you're using TypeScript. So this is one real advantage. So in this case, also, it doesn't really matter which field you're putting this on. We just use the JSON objects because we can additionally store it, but we're actually just modifying several sibling fields that are actually hidden.
Cool. Yeah, we're kind of taking advantage of that a little bit there to use a field to jam in our component, but it seems to work pretty good for us. Excellent. So really the last piece to put in here now, this went a lot faster than I thought it would. You know, I always leave time for everything to fall apart and not work and there to be JavaScript errors and everything, but this is so far, fingers crossed, right? The first time it's worked out. Okay, so there's basically one final piece to do for this application was to put in the aspect ratio previews. I've already, Gregor created this component. I won't take credit for this, but we have an aspect ratio component already developed here because we didn't think there'd be time to do it, but perhaps there was. It's basically just displaying an image with a certain aspect ratio. Nothing too crazy going on there. So for the final piece of code here, we're basically gonna use this aspect ratio component. We already have some defined aspect ratios that we are displaying on our website here. And we're basically going to map through these and display each image in that aspect ratio for the editor. So I think that was the only thing left to do here. Yes, it was. Wonderful. Okay, jumping back to the application, we should now see a lot more. Initially, of course, we have no focus or fit detected. But as soon as we jump in here, let's say we want to focus on the bottom. In our case, we have it set up so that we want them to also select a fit value. Maybe not necessary in some cases, but in this case, we just want to kind of show off the different components you can use here. and the kind of more dynamic things you can do with fields as opposed to what the basic offerings of the Contentful UI gives you. So now if we select a fit, let's go with thumb. This should look horrible. Oh, actually, it actually worked out pretty good. So this is kind of exactly the use case we want to see here. We want the editors to be able to see the image that they're putting in and in the various aspect ratios that it will be used on the website, so that straight away they know that, okay, it's going to look great in all the aspect ratios that we have. If not, maybe they need to go away and edit the image again, come back so that it works, or hopefully they can just choose another focus and fit area here and it'll work. So for example, if maybe they thought that bottom left and crop was going to work, just as an extreme example, obviously that's not going to work. But instead of having to deploy the website, or maybe you have previews set up as well, you can see it straight away. But instead of having to deploy the website, they can straight away get feedback immediately without having to jump to another tab to see how these images are going to display. So in our case, maybe let's go with top and not crop. Let's go with fill. Looks a little bit better, right? But there's still one thing here. Maybe we want to see the front of the U-Bahn here. And I think if we then jump maybe more to center, yeah, looks a lot better, right? And now we can deploy this without having to worry about if it's going to look weird at a certain breakpoint or something like that, because we know exactly the sizes this is going to display at and what it's going to look like. So just something that really kind of, for us, it kind of improves, again, that Slack message of, hey, this image isn't working, or, can we fix it? Can we deploy it? And we have to go into the code and be like, maybe not in this case, because it's been cropped a certain way and it's just not going to work like that. So yeah, just great bit of feedback for editors to use here. Just two more things to highlight. I don't have a faces image ready, but I think for me, two of the most cool things you can use with this image API are the face and faces properties of focus. So basically this says when you query the image from Contentful, you can tell it to focus on a face or faces. And especially if you're using something like thumb, for example, or crop, this will make sure that a person's face or several people's faces are included in the image. So that's, to be honest, that's been a bit of a lifesaver sometimes, just to make sure that images people pick are working across the website in different sizes. Face and pad didn't work. I knew something was going to go wrong at some point, right? Maybe you can't use face along with pad. That's probably what's going on there. Top and pad. Yeah, we were actually wondering, I don't know if David or Stefan, maybe you could shed some light on what kind of use case pad had in terms of, because we always see it in there, I think, scale as well. We're kind of, what's the use case where you would want to scale your image like this? What's the use case where you would want to suddenly add double the space maybe on top of your image or not? I don't know. You're shaking your heads. It doesn't look like either.
Yeah, not too sure. Although I could guess if you have more of a repetitive image, like a pattern image or something, it might make more sense. But
Right.
with photography, it probably doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. I was very curious about that one. Excellent. Yeah. So I kind of breezed through that a lot faster than I thought I would. Let's just jump back over to the slide and just go over a quick summary of what we went through there. Excellent. So yeah, I mean, just a quick summary. Like I was saying, we had an introduction there to the Contentful app framework, how you can use it in which situations, as an entry field, as a sidebar. You can pop up dialogues, things like that. You can replace almost the entire UI if you want to. We showed advantages of how you can take advantage of Next.js for developing Contentful apps. We really love this approach. I mean, we use Next.js anyway for our website, so it was quite easy for us to switch over to it. We had some knowledge already. But again, using each page as a component kind of seems like just a very easy way to be able to deploy things at once and ship apps up to Contentful. So yeah, we showed how they can be installed and applied. You can have private apps. You can have public apps on the marketplace for other people to use. And then, of course, we went through and created an aspect ratio preview app ourselves. We used the Forma 36 components from Contentful so that we can ensure, again, that seamless kind of experience for editors, so they're not jarred why there's suddenly a Bootstrap dropdown or a Material UI card or something in there. Why does it look a bit different? We introduced the sort of auto resizing functionality and handling so that you can make sure that that iframe is taking up the amount of space that it needs to. Also how you kind of might update the values based on other editors editing the entry at the same time. And then of course, how to save and read those changes from Contentful. So this minus the image app, we actually have this Contentful apps repo available for you there. The link at the bottom, github.com/everdev/contentful-apps. This is our basic Next.js setup that I showed you at the start. So feel free to check that out. If you have any kind of pull requests, any improvements, please fire them up there. Fire any issues. If you want to see anything added to it, let us know. Excellent. Yeah, did any questions come in?
Yeah, hi, I have a question. Nice to meet you. I'm Michael from the front-end development team in Project A. Don't think we've met before.
We have not. Nice to meet you.
So one question I have is, how do you actually manage this as a code base, the code base of the app? Like, do you have any kind of like continuous deployment, or have you thought of that? Have you faced that problem at all?
Yeah, maybe I can talk about that. So that's actually what we have set up. So we are deploying different versions of this. So we have a prod version, we have a staging version. So if we want to have different versions on different environments on Contentful, this is really easy for us to set up. And also, I mean, this is just a private repository for us, and it really doesn't matter where you deploy it. If it's not like content that needs to be authenticated or something, you can also just have it public if you feel like it, so other people can use it. And in this case, we just deploy to Vercel just for the simplicity of this. Obviously, we have our own build pipeline set up, and it just works with GitHub Actions. And I think also what's really nice about this is if we now want to kind of modify something, if we want to reuse one part of the app, we can just copy it over to another folder in Pages, and everything is already set up. So all we have to do now is redeploy it. And we could also say that we have like a pre-handle of V1, V2, V3, so you can easily host different versions of this entire application and just be able to put it over and not have to redeploy, and then you can just switch over from version 1 to version 2 of this this application.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Thanks. I mean, actually, my follow-up question that kind of I think from this is, how do you test this actually? Because I was thinking of tests that might run. How do you? What is actually a meaningful test for such an application? I mean, now you were kind of showing how to test it manually on the Contentful UI. Is there any other thing that would give you like confidence that it's working properly?
Yeah, so there's different ways to do it. I mean, I guess you could set up Cypress to do that for you, because you can just go on the page and call the page and then run your test, but you have to do it on Contentful. And that is one tricky part, because if the application, if you're, maybe Adrian, you can just load this URL quickly in the browser, because it's only gonna show the loading spinner because the SDK is not loaded. But you could easily just go on the Contentful page, and then you obviously would have to write rather complicated tests on Cypress. But considering if you have engineers for that just do testing, that should be really easy to set up.
Yeah, I guess it's then a question of whether it's worth the effort or not, depending on the
I don't know if David or Stefan have anything to add to that.
Yeah, just to chime in, we've so over at Contentful, we have set up Cypress tests, which it does go through like the whole slew. So it requests a token, it logs in via a test user. There's like a test organization and space. And because everything can be done via the API, you can set up a dummy organization and make a bunch of API calls to like install a definition or install the app into a space, and then load the app and see if the iframe is showing up. Of course, that's fairly involved, but if you do get it to that point, you can kind of verify that everything's working the way you wanted it to work. And of course, you can also do some unit testing. If you just trust that, if you're using React in Forma 36, for example, you can just do some unit testing and trust that React is going to render properly when put into a browser.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? Now is the time to chime in.
Do you have plans to also open source the components that you're building? So right now you have this boilerplate, which relies on the page structure per app in a certain location. Is that on the radar, or do you plan to do that? For example, the switch, right? If you publish that to NPM, it could be usable in different boilerplates or setups or something.
Yeah, definitely. We're really looking into making these extracting stuff that we're building while we're developing features that we need and saying, hey, this is reusable. This could totally be open source. Other people are definitely going to enjoy using it, because we strongly rely on open source anyways. Nothing would in the business would run without open source. So obviously open source everything that we can. Just the same way that even our own design system is also 100% open source, just to also for people to see how did they build it.
Let us know when you have these out there so that we can spread the word.
Yeah. Feel free to also submit your own applications to the repo. We'll gladly accept them.
I was actually just curious. Oh, sorry. Do you have more?
No, I mean, would you expect, so right now it's a template on GitHub, isn't it? Right.
That's true. Actually, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I set it up as a template, and I only put a very simple application in there that maybe people might want to use, just to keep it really simple. But I don't know where we're going with this entire thing. I just thought it would be nice for people to see, I can just use it and test it in my company.
Yeah, that probably needs a little bit of thought, but if it would be a template with, I don't know, and I'm just thinking big here, right, with 1,000 different components, and you can just install it, deploy it to Vercel, and then use different routes, that would be actually pretty nice.
Yeah, and nothing is preventing us here. We might probably make, yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe we can even make 2 repositories, just fork this one and make it like a full featured thing where people can just propose different things and they can just run it, and it would be like a community kind of thing, like definitely typed or something like that, you know?
Yeah, super nice. Thanks.
Just again, there's the link to the application down the bottom for anybody who might
I have it open already. I will definitely play around with that.
Wonderful.
I have one more question if I'm not taking anybody else's question time. So going back a little bit, actually, not on the technical side, but I mean, this I can definitely see the power of this. This is super cool, the result. I wonder what specifically brought Evernest here. What was the actual business need that brought you to develop your own Contentful apps? Like how does this requirement come about?
Gregor, going to take that, or?
No, you go first. I mean,
I saw you unmuted yourself. I was like, is he going to take it? No. So what kind of led us onto using extensions first of all, and now kind of migrating over to using apps? Was basically to treat. So there's this kind of accepted thing that goes around where internal tools are just internal tools, and you know your colleagues can just deal with this 20-year-old interface, which is not accessible. Just who cares? It's internal, you know. But when it comes to something like Evernest, especially when you're trying to build something really big, you want to grow fast. You're maybe planning to expand to different areas, introduce different products, and you want to control that all with Contentful. I think it's very important to kind of approach treating Contentful and your implementation of it more like a product than just something that's used in the back end. So basically, that's kind of what led us on to using extensions and applications, was just that we can make our editor's life a lot easier, and then kind of lessen their need to create bug tickets or create requests for additional features, because they can take care of it more easily with the extensions that we've developed. I mean, the obvious one was kind of this navigation. I mean, normally, depending on how you've set it up, you probably aren't kind of holding your navigation inside Contentful, and it's always going to be a new ticket, a new pull request, a code review to get a new thing into that navigation. But setting up something like this, now our editors don't have to talk to us at all. Maybe if they want a new feature in here, sure, we can add it to the application. But straight away, they can just add or remove things from the navigation. You can have the nesting and hovering kind of conditionals are all set up there in the front end. So it takes care of that without us having to do anything, and kind of basically just gives us more time to focus on building other things, I guess, right? So yeah, I think that's basically the reason why we approached it.
Yeah, I have to say that makes total sense. And I completely agree with the sentiment of treating your CMS like as a product.
Yeah.
And investing in it and like reaping the rewards of the efficiency of being able to.
Exactly. I think maybe it's initially a hard sell for some people, kind of, but I think in the long run, especially maybe a couple of years later when your product's really far along, you will definitely see the benefits of having initially taken the time to kind of set that up.
Yeah, from a product side of things, it's also like Contentful usually is this kind of general CMS that you can use for everything, and we're always kind of on the side. Okay, how opinionated should we be for certain use cases? So now this is a kind of headless API first CMS. So which direction do you go, and how many people do you cut off, right? So we are just with your opinions. So we just took the approach. Well, we can take some opinions in certain areas. Maybe we don't. Maybe we should. Kind of depends on what features we provide. But this is kind of the way to kind of improve the editor experience, because at the end of the day, we cannot know what 1,000 different customers want their editors to put in there. So this is this kind of opportunity and the way to make the CMS that basically is running somewhere by someone else your own.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also something that I really like about Contentful, that it is not that opinionated. It just has a very flat structure, and you can do whatever you want. And that's also why I mean, this is why you should invest in Contentful apps, because sometimes it might be very hard to do just a conditional field. Like say field A if field A is checked, then I want to see field B and field C. In the other cases, I don't want to see it. You cannot do it because that structure doesn't happen yet on the Contentful side. So you have to write an app for it. But the experience for the editors is so much nicer because they don't have to look at all these 200 optional fields in your content type.
Yeah, and it's not even you can take advantage of them in other ways. Like we've mainly been talking about making the editor's life more simple here, but you can do kind of more things like that. For example, I think in terms of displaying like Google Maps on a website, maybe you want to throw a pin on that website. So you've initially maybe allowed your editor to be able to put in an address, shall we say, inside a content entry so that we know where that address is. But behind those scenes, we can do things like then look up that address via maybe the Google Maps API or some other map API. And then we can get the latitude and longitude, for example, and we can store those in hidden fields. The editor doesn't have to know about this at all. But when it comes down to the front end and in the GraphQL query, you can get these values through there and use them maybe to place a pin on the map in the front end. So it's not necessarily just for making editors' lives easier. There's a whole host of things you can take advantage of with them.
Yeah, and we use this exact case, for example, to show polygons on the map. So now we are not using the standard location field that Contentful already provides, but we also have the ability to add polygons, to have different kind of features on it, and to really configure a lot more that you just wouldn't be able to do without that option.
One question from my side. I mean, if you speak about apps, then one thing that comes to my mind is a question about versioning. So how do you, let's say, continue, or if you have the need to introduce like a BC break somewhere, how would that actually work? Would you create like a second app and then have like a content migration, let's say, where you have like a controlled way of bringing data from one state to the other, or how do you approach that topic?
Yeah, definitely. So migrations is something that we've already looked into. We're not really using it. We're still migrating a lot by hand, but also we haven't had too complicated migrations yet. But yeah, I mean, you always have the option to say you're going to deploy this app to maybe a versioned URL somewhere. So you could always say you always have v1 my content Contentful apps, whatever. So you always have that version and have it stable there and manage it like packages on NPM are managed, because this way you can always jump back and forth. You don't really care about it. But the other advantage of using Next.js is that you can just make a subfolder and have all these versions lying in one application. And since this, you don't need SEOs, you don't care about performance, you don't care about so many things in here because they're just tiny applications in your content. You can really just run that entire application the entire time and have everything basically switchable on the fly.
All right, thanks.
I saw that the apps are installed on the organization scope. Are there any options to install them or install the apps on environment base?
Hey, I
So
can probably take that question.
I think that would be the best case for it.
Yeah, so actually, when we look at the app definition, which is on the organization level, that is not an app being installed anywhere. That is instead the app this is like the blueprint of the app, what it looks like, where it's going to go. But all apps are installed on the space environment level. So it's more, apps are more in line with like how like a user might be part of an organization, whereas an app is going to be part of an organization. And that app can be installed into multiple spaces if you want, or it can just be installed into one space. The reason we do that is because we do have use cases where someone wants to build an app for 2 different spaces and even potentially link those spaces together. So having a single app for that use case makes a lot of sense. And that's why on the organization level, it also makes sense. And then on top of that, there are some things to think about when it comes to permissioning and authorization. For example, if you've got an organization admin that wants to completely disable an app across all spaces, they can do that by either deleting the app definition or changing the app definition to be a different URL that has a different version. Let's say if there's a serious bug or something. So I think it's just more about, in this case, the ideology there is more about just being able to control the app and understand how you can install it into multiple spaces, but also have control over it in all of the spaces at your organization level.
I mean, you could also, in the app itself, fetch the current environment and therefore show a different subfolder, for example, of deployed apps.
So yes, you could do that if you wanted to. That would make your app fairly dynamic, and it would probably, I don't know if we've ever seen anyone do that kind of a use case. I'd be interested in seeing that. But for the most part, people have just been creating the one app definition, and then the app gets served from that main location, and there's no dynamicism in how the app loads based on the environment it's in terms of like the app itself changing.
And I think what we will mostly use it for is if we have a dev deployment, every feature for us is deployed, so it's fully testable. So we also have a dev deployment of that application. So when we do QA, they can already check, does this application work with the actual dev environment? And then basically when that is done, we move that over, because per environment, you can define which URL you're targeting. So if you have a new stage, not stage, but new sandbox environment, you can just say use that sandbox application until QA is done, and after that I can just delete it. And in the best case, obviously this is all automated, so you just write a script for it and then just assign it, and it automatically closes when you merge the feature.
All right. Thanks a lot, Adrian, so far already for the great presentation. And I think like the really nice format you've chosen. So are there any other questions left? All right, doesn't look like that. So then everybody, thanks a lot for joining. We hope you actually enjoyed the session. I think we got a lot of input here. And again, thanks a lot to everybody for preparing and presenting that. And then looking forward to one of the next sessions about whatever topic we will see. And so far, have a great evening or afternoon, wherever you are, and enjoy the rest of the week. See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.